first session was a wonderful lead-in. I want to add my thanks to the Honorable Minister from Botswana and for the wonderful welcome. I want to welcome my distinguished panelists and I look forward to a lively discussion with you. And the topic of ICT came up a number of times, and I appreciate how some of the key areas that were really drawn out. First, this notion of diamonds and the children and the learner being right at the center of what is so important for the other area that came up, key economic development and a prosperous Africa. So ICT, it seems to me, has been a topic that's been discussed year after year after year. And in my role, I'm quite fortunate because I get to travel to different parts of the world, and I guess you could say I get to see best practices. But in reality, when it comes to technology, what is true is there is no one-size-fits-all. And nowhere else is that true than when you look at even the individual countries within Africa. Each country has its own challenges, and I think those challenges need to be recognized. You know, I would say how you really measure success is looking at how technology answers what the visionaries and the leaders within a given country, when they set the agenda, is the technology really delivering on the promise associated with economic development, a prosperous social, cultural, and economic environment within the country. So I think these are the key questions, and that's the key measure. So I want to put this ICT discussion a little bit in context. I want to also recognize that we need basic infrastructure. We need buildings, we need connections, connectivity. These are all important. But this is a very distinguished, it's a leadership panel. So I want to draw out some ideas and questions and roll up our sleeves to get into some ideas and thinking about what the real future looks like and what the potential might look like. So with that in mind, let's begin. Let's start with the notion of how a country might participate in and amongst itself to create a more efficient environment to deliver ICT. There's no question that the cost of delivering technology is constantly going up. And it was commented in this morning's session that that's a real pressure. So we've also said education plays a crucial role in economic and social development globally. And we are considering the importance that education is also a lifelong pathway. So I'd like to ask my distinguished panelists, and I would like to start with Honorable Minister Alupo. In your country, do you see the opportunity for cooperation between primary, secondary, higher education, and corporate training to support the use of ICT resources? Not necessarily directing them, but can we share the use among different groups? And are you seeing governance models to allow for this?
Well, first to thank the Minister of Botswana for the warm welcome, and secondly, thank the chairperson for beginning with me. I skipped that chair because I thought you'd begin with him, but you have still begun with me. Well, in Uganda, like any other country, we have a lot of interest in developing our human resource. And there is no way we can do this apart from investing heavily in education. And government over the years has allocated resources to education sector. And education sector has always been either the first or the second in terms of taking the biggest chunk of the GDP. Well, coming back to the question, I know that there needs to be linkages between primary, secondary, and higher, as the chair has stated, in light of realizing results maximally on the teaching and learning using ICT. Chair, what the audience here may wish to note is that e-learning has been embraced by government of Uganda across all stages. And government has done this by providing software and hardware of ICT to all our education institutions, to some of the education institutions, but with a view to covering all of them. We are, for instance, establishing laboratories in all our secondary schools. In about 126 secondary schools that we have already established ICT laboratories in about 800 of them. And we are looking forward to covering the remaining. And the idea is that government has also made ICT examinable at A level. So there is no shortcut about anyone doing without learning and teaching ICT at the secondary school level. What I know is that we are still faced with challenges in covering some of the schools that have not yet been covered in the provision of infrastructure, ICT infrastructure, and also some private institutions, private secondary schools. But government is working very closely with these private institutions with a view to finding a way of providing ICT infrastructure to all our secondary schools. We have also retooled our science teachers in the teaching of ICT, where in all our secondary schools we have at least an ICT teacher who were retooled by government under a program that government rolled out to retool science teachers and ICT teachers. But Chair, most importantly, what we are also trying to develop is mechanisms on how to work with private providers and also do research on the consequences of some of this software, both good and bad, so that the users are cautioned about, for instance, using a computer beyond some specified period of time, and so that the learners are also aware about what they need to be protected from when they are using these gadgets. Chair, for now, I think
very good.
That is the response that I can
Well,
give.
the notion of we can't do this on our own, and it requires participation between many groups to make it work, I think is kind of the key message in your response. I would like to direct the same question to Mr. Ponera, who is the head of ICT for education and vocational training in Tanzania. Is there sharing within your country for resources?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In Tanzania, we have, before 2 years ago, there was a program. We started a program, Tanzania Beyond Tomorrow, e-education in education training. Then we came to realize that that project, it was not sustainable. So we decided to start with preparing the program that we manage with will manage and mainstream all of the projects, different projects with the different stakeholders, so that we all will come together and utilize the resources accordingly. And then we started to capacitate the teachers, train teachers, especially for science and mathematics. And that training was done with the collaboration with other partners, development partners, especially in content, and also with the equipment, special devices. And that training we did we started with the TOT, trainers of trainers, with the cascading. We started with 21 centers, because we have 21 region. All region, we created a center of training for teachers, especially for science and mathematics. And we equipped with the resources, computers, with the tablets for teachers. And then we train so that these centers can be a center for training for other teachers.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. From that, while we continuing with that training, we came to realize that there's a different needs and a different requirement according to a different environment. Some environment is in remote, some environment is in a rural, semi-rural, and some in urban area. So now we are preparing the analysis for all the different environment, so that we can capacitate with the different gadgets, with the different skills according to a different environment.
Very good.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you found an answer to a challenging problem when you run out of resources to be able to deliver. Let's move on in the ICT topic, and I'll direct this question to Dr. Oji. And this is an interesting topic, and again, to stay on the visionary theme, recognizing we have some basic things we have to do with ICT. However, in this morning's discussion, we talked about the diamond and the student at the center of the discussion. So there are new and exciting developments relative to ICT. Students are very comfortable once they're online. They can talk to their friends, so we know this. We don't necessarily have an understanding what they're talking about, but people are interacting, which is positive. Now, we know there's also digital content starting to enter into the whole discussion of teaching and learning, and digital content is a key and valuable resource, and digital content comes from a lot of different places. And there's also the idea of understanding a student who might respond to, say, visual cues versus text. And we could use and adapt digital content to do this. I wanted to get your thoughts on the idea of understanding the student and then delivering something that's a little bit more personalized using ICT. In the same sense as if a person can't speak the language, we have digital capability within ICT to do translation. So my question is really, if we use technologies associated with digital content, analytics, do we have the opportunity within your country and other African countries to leapfrog compared to other groups? Because it does take a long time to introduce new content, new digital content, and those capabilities. What are your thoughts, Mr. Oji? Dr. Oji?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the organizers of this program, and also I bring you greetings from Nigeria. The minister who have been here himself, in the recent time, there have been a lot of changes. So we have a supervising minister who is in charge of education right now. So going straight to the point, what you're asking, ICT is the key for education at all levels. Then in terms of the content, the curriculum, in Nigeria, we have a parastatal that is solely in charge of developing curriculum. Any type there is a reform going on, any type of content, whether it is the primary, secondary, tertiary institutions, we have this group that can develop this content to any level, that can enable us to move as far as we can. And I also like to mention here, in Nigeria, knowing the importance of ICT. Just recently, in education about two years ago, a department was just created, the one I'm heading now, because of the importance of ICT, applying ICT in the school, cutting across all the levels. And we have done a lot in trying to make our people to use ICT. For instance, if you go to all the schools, we have, Nigeria is a very large country. The population alone is about 160 million. When we talk about the secondary schools, let me just mention the secondary school that is within the federal government purview is 104 unity schools. We call them unity schools. These are federal government schools. Not to talk of the one in the states and the local government. And the university will have well over 50 universities. I'm talking about federal, because each state has a university. A federal university. There is a federal university, presence of federal university in each state. Then there is state university, there is a polytechnic, there is college of education, all in one state. We multiply it times 36, so we'll be able to know what I'm talking about. So what I'm saying, in effect, for each school, we have a data center. Each school has a data center, and this data center is equipped. And we equally have a government company called Galaxy Backbone. And this entire, the work of this company is to give connectivities to all the schools, create the needed bandwidth, so that each student will be able to get on internet and realize whatever you want to get. And in addition, the government of Nigeria is building a library for all the unity schools, not to talk of the university, so that in terms of realizing educational standards, we'll be able to get it from there.
Can I ask, from a content perspective, where does the content come from?
The content, we have a NERVC. This is a council. It's in charge of the content, because they have the syllabus, they work out the curriculum, and they make the content. We know the content is something that it takes a lot of time. So they develop it. They have their modus operandi, how they can develop this and then pass it across to the schools.
Okay, very good. We all have devices, at least 3 of us do. Let's talk a little bit about bring your own device. And within ICT, I wanted to ask your opinion about devices and students that may or may not be able to. I think the fundamental assumption is probably can't bring your own device. But over time and in the future, is this a sustainable solution? Or is it a recipe for technology anarchy? Do we really want to see devices go into the hands of each student? And if some students have a device and other students don't have a device, does that cause a real problem in terms of being able to deliver seamless education? And I'd like to start by directing that question to Honorable Mr. Ilukena, who is the Secretary Ministry of Education for Namibia.
Thank you, Chair, and honorable ministers, delegates, good morning. Now, before I answer as to whether bring your own device is the best way or not, I'm just troubled by something. One is the room is a bit cold for ICT interaction. We seem to be so quiet as if we came to bury ICTs, so I'm not quite sure. Doesn't offer for that interaction, but something that I observed last night when we were at the cocktail here, I ran into a colleague and we were standing outside, and I was listening to what was happening around us, and I remarked to say, you know, the noise that I hear in the olden days, if my great-grandfather was still alive, he would have been able to tell me exactly what was going on, whether this is going to be a good year in terms of rain and our harvest, or it's going to be a dry year and we need to prepare ourselves. Because out there you could have heard a nice noise coming from birds that were singing and communicating something to us. In the olden days, that would have been very meaningful. But if you ask me as to what they were communicating, I have no idea. But my grandfather would have done quite well. Now, in terms of contextualizing the ICTs, particularly as it applies to education, and more so to the question that was asked, my view is that it works both ways. It is nice to have your own device because it allows you not to be limited by the time of exposure that you have in a classroom setting. I think there is an old saying that says practice makes perfect. And I think what you would want is for someone to have access to a device so that they can try and make mistakes over and over again, because it's only through mistakes that you can learn as to where you went wrong. And I think those that have opened up to ICTs, they know that they started by making mistakes but never gave up. And that's how you are able to explore and understand as to what this technology can do and the power of the technology. Yes, indeed, in our setting, it is a problem. Because if you were to leave that to say individual learners should bring their own devices to school, definitely you are going to perpetuate the digital divide and the gap, because then the haves will have the advantage to be able to access those devices. But those that do not have, they will be excluded. And I think this is where educational institutions come to play, ministries of education, because our job is to create a level play field as well as an enabling environment so that we are able to facilitate the achievement of the embracement of technology by the majority of our learners if we can afford, but at least to guarantee that if we can't, when they come to school, they are all equal in terms of how much they get exposed. So in a way, what I'm suggesting is that one way, on the other hand, it is okay because it allows the individual to continue practicing. But should that be the rule or a policy? I would say no, in my view. That should not excuse governments from providing or making provision that is accessible to the majority, so that you are able to at least give the opportunity to everyone else to be exposed to the technology at hand.
It's very good. Honorable Minister Alupo, would you try and take a stab at that question? Do you have a thought about bringing your own device? bring your own device, and if people do bring their own device, because many people do have a cell phone or have access to a cell phone, should that be supplied by the government or not? And does it create a problem for people that do have a device versus people that do not?
Well, I believe and feel that my colleague here has sufficiently taken care of that concern. But in addition to that, Chairman, my thinking is that bringing your own device also has some disadvantages. For instance, that means that even in the place of work, when someone is moving, can move with some very vital information, which someone who is coming in may require for purposes of institutional memory. And in some areas where information which is very sensitive is kept in the gadgets, someone will take away security information and you are not sure about where, in whose hands it will end. So it's agreeable that, and I strongly believe that government should provide its ICT infrastructure in forums which are accessible to learners, to officials, and in an environment which is restricted and protected, and where governments can also be able to service this infrastructure and make them usable at all times. But where someone has the capacity to acquire one, like Chair, you can see in front here, all my colleagues have the capacity to acquire an iPad, and they came with them. But for me, who did not have the capacity, I should still be given a chance to access the gadgets in the business center, for instance. So, Mr. Chairman, in one way or the other, it works depending on the situation. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. I want to stay on the topic of mobility. So away necessarily from the device, but still considering the fact that children and learners move to different locations, and we need infrastructure to support constant access so they can access teaching resources. Or in fact, they might be schooling themselves from home, as an example. So one of the fastest growing areas of the ICT area is associated with mobile devices, mobile applications. We can get access to these things once we're online. I'll direct this for Nigeria, who determines the content of those applications, and how do policymakers influence what content is allowed and what content isn't relative to that, what goes over the ICT infrastructure? And you already touched on the content area, but maybe you can build on that in a mobile setting. So now if this content is traveling across Nigeria, how do you manage that?
Before, Mr. Chair, before I speak on the content again, from what my colleague was talking about, I'm an advocate of seamless integration, building on the same platform. So my own advocate goes to, if you want to move ahead, you probably maybe in a class, you have a uniform system, having the same footing, then everybody, all hands on deck. It is that time that competition can come in. But if you allow somebody, you bring in your equipment, I bring in my own, then that basis of benchmarking will not be there. So it will be better we are training individual, and it also depends on the government's willingness to provide those devices. Because if you have the capacity to provide the devices, I think the government will do well enough to provide the devices for everybody to be on the same platform. So having said that, in terms of the curriculum, government of the people, government understand what he wants. It is government that will give the policy direction, how the content, what is the content, what do we really want, by dishing out the training, the learning to our students. So basically, much of the input will come from the government. Because in many places, like in Nigeria, the budget, the biggest chunk of the budget goes to education. And who is the government? The government is you and me. So we sit down with the partners, because the government, they have their partners, the collaborators, sit down and design what is good for the children. And this is where you are going to be looking at the content, where you are developing the content. And then you give the direction. That's what I take within myself.
Do we understand, or does the policymakers or the implementers understand what content works and what content doesn't work, do you feel, within a given learning setting? Do we have a good understanding that this piece of reading material would advance the student and this piece of reading material might not? And is there more work we can do in that area?
I think in terms of that, I think what can really come in there is we have stakeholders at the planning stage. You sit down together and be able to know what goes in or what comes out. I think based on that, you'll be able to determine the content correctly. That's my feeling.
Very good. Would you like to, I direct that same question to you in terms of content and mobility. Sorry, I think we started at the point of saying mobility and having access across Tanzania. And how do you share content?
Yeah, in fact, in case of Tanzania, in fact, we are looking toward from traditional method because the content is there. What is required to transform the traditional content to digital content? Because the institute, like in Tanzania, we have the Institute of Educational, which is responsible for curriculum. They are responsible for building the content. That is to be used on different devices, especially with relation to influence of policymakers. The policies and the rules and the regulation should be on a place because the new technology now it is incapacitated on an e-content, electronic content, that having a real education in real-time education information as one determining to the content of to ensure the policy, rules, and the regulation on the use of the content is in place, so that this one can guide how to use it for teachers, students, and the public. That one can be utilized in anywhere, especially at a home, at a classrooms, even teachers' preparation on that.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So your content development activities really moving at it sounds like a rapid pace, especially if content can adapt at the home, but also in the classroom. Is that
Yeah.
what you're looking to do? Dr. Oji, in the case of Nigeria, similar question in terms of the mobility setting. Is content very much portable, whether it be at the home setting versus in the classroom, in terms of its adaptability technically? Is it, you're able to use it in various settings?
Come again, what is it?
Oh, sorry. The content, the mobility, sorry, I meant to direct the question to Mr. Ilukena.
Okay.
So the question was relative to mobility and content and using content both in the classroom and in the home setting.
No, thank you, Chair. Yes, I think in the case of Namibia, for instance, we have the National Institute for Educational Development that is responsible for content, including digitalization of the content. But that does not stop individual schools to borrow some existing content. I'm saying so to indicate that there are certain areas where even if, it does not correspond in terms of one-to-one with your national curriculum. These are basic principles that operates universally. For instance, in areas such as mathematics, you have in areas such as sciences like biology, the blood doesn't change. It doesn't matter whether it's in Asia or whatever, it's still the same composition. So we are saying for those that you can download as an individual to enrich what there is covered, the digital content that might be covered by your local curriculum, that's okay. Individual schools can do so, provided they have the access to download such content. So indeed you will find, and I'm using my own personal experience, you will find, my wife is a teacher, a primary school teacher, and she has transformed her class into almost like digital. This thing that I'm carrying, it spends more time with her than it does with me.
Fantastic.
And last night when I was checking here, the lessons I got here have nothing to do with my day-to-day job. And I also noticed here that my son, who is 9 years old, downloaded some play games that I don't know where he got them from.
Exactly.
But the point is that yes, for as long as you have an environment where your whatever gadget, because I think the issue is security and control. For the young minds, you don't want them to go beyond what they are supposed to be exposed to.
Exactly.
For my wife, she's a professional. She knows exactly what she's looking for because she has communities of learning that she needs to link up with, and those are the people that she corresponds. So for every lesson that she has, that we have on our curriculum, she gets additional enrichment from that community of learning that is outside Namibia. And so you will have that interaction. So all I'm saying is that for those, there is that need for governments to have the content, digital content that corresponds to your curriculum, but also flexibility to say, beyond this, if you can download and enrich, for as long as it's in the controlled environment, secure environment, one would think that should not be a problem.
Excellent. Very good answers. Honorable Minister, did you have a comment?
And besides that, Chair, I was saying that the idea of content also has linkages really on what the learner should know and what the teacher should know in line with the curriculum. And in light of the changing curriculum these days, it is a challenge. For the case of Uganda, for instance.
Do you want to push your mic closer? I don't know if people can hear.
For the case of Uganda, for instance, you realize that we review our curriculum in every 5 to 10 years. So that means that the content keeps changing. And our review of the curriculum is in line with what the Minister of Botswana was saying, that are we really mindful about the children who are at school being our leaders of tomorrow, our workers of tomorrow? So we try to keep changing the curriculum so that it produces the children who are holistically prepared enough to handle the world of work tomorrow. But like my colleague here has said, it has happened in some classes in Uganda where a child, for instance, after downloading packages in the computer, the next morning can teach even a teacher. It has happened in some classes where a child knows more than the teacher, and that has been a challenge. So, Mr. Chairman, what we have encouraged is that we in the Ministry of Education and Sports work very closely with National Curriculum Development Center and ICT Ministry, which has Uganda Communications Commission under them, with expertise in the management of what each sector is a requirement to each sector and how it should be used. But the beauty about this, again, Mr. Chairman, is that this content and e-learning makes learning more student-centered than teacher-centered alone. So you realize that the advantages of it bringing education to being learner-centered more than being teacher-centered has motivated many learners and given them a lot of interest in actually exploring and discovering more and doing research on what they are doing in schools. So I think content should be a responsibility of Curriculum Development Center for us in Uganda, Ministry of Education and Sport, and the expertise in the Uganda Communications Commission. But it's very important that we protect the young learners, when especially downloading packages that are not in consonance with their level of understanding or their level of intelligence. Thank you.
Excellent answer. And it starts to bring up some other topics, because now we've touched on secure delivery, we've touched on the device, we've touched on mobility, but in the last two responses, we're now considering the individual. We're talking about one-to-one and the diamond, and saying, well, who is learning at their own pace, and maybe another child is learning at a different pace, and we need to recognize that, because that's crucial to the overall learning process. So with that in mind, what about the use of data? There's been more and more articles and commentary about the use of data, big data, and that could be across the country relative to understanding who the student is. Do they have to travel to school? Are they homeschooled? Is one learner stronger than another? These are all sources of information that could help improve the delivery of the content in a one-to-one setting. So what about the use of data as part of an ICT strategy? Can we better understand the learner and use the technology and translate this to success? And do you believe that data along with ICTs can contribute to developing a smarter process of how we deliver educational materials, how we coach teachers in terms of responding to the individual student? And if you don't mind, can I start with you again, since you finished the last Honorable Minister Alupo? You touched on the one-to-one, so I feel compelled to take that question to you.
I think, Mr. Chairman, I had already said something about that. For instance, that the e-learning enables the learner to participate fully in the teaching and learning environment. And I had already also said, Mr. Chairman, that digital teaching and learning is more attractive, especially to young learners, than the other traditional classroom learning mechanism. And in terms of delivery of education to learners, for the case of Uganda, the laboratories that I had already said that we set up in all secondary schools are overwhelmed even by students or young people who are not necessarily students in that school. And our policy is that when neighboring young people come to school and request to use the laboratory, we allow them in an organized manner when the students are not using them to use the facilities. So in terms of demand for the infrastructure, Mr. Chairman, it is very clear that it has attracted a lot of young people wanting to participate in acquiring some knowledge in one way or the other from the ICT infrastructure.
I would like to direct that same question to the rest of the group. The use of data in terms of adding data or information on the student and having that shape your ICT strategy. Are there initiatives going on in your country that allow for that? And I'll direct that at Dr. Oji.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. E-learning. You know, when you look at, as we have different people, we have different capabilities, different abilities to learn. Looking at e-learning, I think that still gives the best method of learning because you can learn at your own pace. You may be slow, and steady, you may be fast.
Yeah,
Then at any time you can learn, in the night, in the morning, anytime, so that whatever they go away from the traditional learning itself. It's also very good that when this is happening, you keep track of the data. Data is very important. How to organize your data is very important.
What is it?
That when you are learning, the purpose of that particular learning in a classroom, taking the data of each student, that will help you for planning future things for the classes. Maybe in a class of 10, you'll be able to have information concerning all these people. This will even give you room to know who is doing well, who is not doing well. You can come back and check, and so that you bring them to the same level. So I still believe the e-learning is just about the best method of learning, or the M-learning itself, the mobile learning.
Very good. Mr. Ponera, for Tanzania, are you using data to inform the use of content and teaching?
Yeah, in fact, we are using data because we started with teacher education. Most of teacher education, because it is all connected to the network and
Yes.
provided with the internet and resources. But as the previous speakers said, that the information there on the net or which is already prepared for teachers and students, sometimes it's limited. But student can search and download information which is appropriate to that subject. From that we can see the differences between learners, even teachers, how they perform. That one can be tracked by using data, how the performance of the student and a student on that class or on a particular time. You can see that they are quite different. But this one can be seen and be planned for the future, that most of the information which is available on the internet or on reserve data centers can be guided so that most of the students can be acquired according to the syllabus, according to the planned session which is there during that time. And that one can be utilized on data of performance, especially on statistic on performance. When during exams, sometimes during the quiz or other assignments, you can see that there's a quite different information which is providing from the student, because of the every student can have access differently. Yeah.
So you are moving towards a more personalized way of delivering education. Mr. Ilukena from Namibia, same question relative to the use of data, and I think you brought up the topic of one-to-one and personalized as well. The use of data to start to understand the learner's ability, the teacher who might be connected to that learner, and how does that interoperate within Namibia to produce better outcomes for that individual?
Thank you. Now, I think we do have a program that we are using as a ministry, and we bought this program from, the program is called Edgell, the education program that we are using to run our examinations, as well as an attempt to reduce the workload on the professional staff, that's the teachers as well as the managers in school, to simplify their work, that's number one, but also to be able to use the program in a way of tracing the performance of individual learners. Because there is what you would want that we normally call remedial teaching. Now, remedial teaching comes in when you know what the deficiencies in terms of content coverage of an individual learner is, so that you then know as to how you can assist that individual, say, for after school. And you can only do that by capturing the information as you teach, because you have, well, depending on the system, in our case, you have only 45 minutes to deliver your lesson. Now, you will not be able to interact with each an individual learner within that 45 minutes. So it requires that you capture the information as you go. So that data is critical for us to be able to know is how do you assist the rest of the learners that may not have comprehended the topic that the teacher was covering during the normal working hours. So that helps you to now plan your remedial teaching. But also in terms of data capturing, because this is the information that you would want to see passed on from one grade to the next. So you are gathering this data and information, which becomes a lifespan of an individual, particularly in a school setting environment. So for me as a grade 5 teacher, for instance, what do I know about this particular student in grade 4, 3, 2, or 1? But if there is that information captured, which becomes part of the profile that I'm building, a data profile that I'm building on this student, it allows the next teacher to look at that profile and be able to see as to how they can assist this learner in terms of the areas where the learner might have difficulties and so on. Some of them could be social, maybe the person lost their parents when they were in grade 3 and their performance in grade 5 is going down. You don't know because you're just meeting them in grade 5. So it does help when you create such a database that allows you to feed back into the system and be able to strengthen the teaching and learning, but also to maximize the benefit that the learner gets out of the process.
Fantastic, fantastic. I think that is an excellent note to close the panel on. There were a couple of slides that I had. I really want to sincerely thank this distinguished panel, because I think where we were trying to take the ICT discussion was to a visionary, a leadership place, and I hope it was informative for the audience. I want to go back by saying, we do recognize that we have to start somewhere, and that could be we have to build buildings, we have to create connectivity, we have to have basic secure access. But at the same time, I'm very grateful that you shared some of your ideas around personalized learning, and even this last topic around putting the student at the center. So I don't know if I had a couple of slides to close with. Can we put those up? The first one was very topical around not only what we talked about in the first session, the imperative of economic development and the importance of human capital. But in our session with ICT, I think what we were trying to do is say, well, there are technologies involved, and how do we assemble those technologies to make sure that we're answering to things like putting the student at the center of the equation and recognizing that student is going through a lifelong learning pathway. And what does that pathway look like, and what do we need to service the student? So the next chart, please. I think my distinguished panel did a very good job touching on some of the key topics associated with when I worked with my colleagues and we were preparing for some of this discussion. Again, in the visionary sense, we were saying to ourselves, well, within these various countries in Africa, is there an opportunity to really reshape the classroom? And if there was, what are the considerations relative to ICT? So those were some of the 5 areas that we talked about: secure access, mobility. We put analytics and data higher because of this notion that just came up in the last discussion relative to understanding the individual and tailoring the delivery, the course, the content to a specific individual. And of course, as the learner goes through their lifelong learning pathway, we want to continue to capture information and understand their capabilities and bring that back into society so they're a productive member, contributing to the country as a whole. So I'd like to close. Again, thank you very much. I think we're going to break now, but we're going to close it with a little video that talks about IBM's Smarter Education vision, and maybe we could roll that now.
All businesses have to measure outcomes and results in order to continue doing business. But what if your business is education?
A smarter city's multiple school systems once suffered from the inefficiency of separate management processes, wasting precious resources.
By finding smart ways to integrate the systems, share information, and use data to make better decisions,
the smarter city can offer citizens opportunities not just for a great education and skill development, but for a lifetime of learning.
Beginning in primary school, accessible educational materials, open learning environments, and student performance analytics provides a customized learning experience
Designed around students and their teachers.
Giving them the tools they need to succeed in an information-based society.
these smarter classrooms run on a dynamic infrastructure that is flexible, interconnected, and predictive.
Teachers Teachers in a smarter classroom can engage students wherever they are, on whatever device they might have.
Home computers,
Cell phones,
MP3 players, even inexpensive internet-based thin clients or netbooks.
Student progress can be tracked against benchmarks mapped to national and local standards.
real-time student data from test scores, assignments, and attendance records helps teachers identify individual needs, learning styles, and recommended coursework.
Each student is enabled to reach her potential.
In the smarter city, teachers, parents, and students can know how well they're doing at all times, not just test times, and can make adjustments accordingly.
administrators can use this information to make smarter decisions for their school systems.
Every year, whether through promotion or a family move, 40% of the Smarter City students change schools.
Because student information is stored electronically and is accessible by the entire education system,
School administrators can exchange data and collaborate with each other.
A student's records, progress, test scores, and achievements can travel with her, so her education can be more seamless and consistent.
Even across different school systems and campuses.
University research, a critical ingredient of economic and scientific development, is dependent upon significant computing power.
The Smarter Cities universities use cloud-based virtualization technologies to centrally manage high-performance computing resources, run software, and perform upgrades.
This means less money gets spent on IT maintenance, and more is available for teaching and creating innovation through research.
Just because a student is out of school doesn't mean she should stop learning.
Open platforms make it possible for people to receive learning services from any education provider, so when the time comes to look for a new job and the job after that, citizens can keep their skills current and valued by potential employers.
As we grow older, smarter computers and software can be designed to match a lifelong student's changing abilities.
Life in a smarter city isn't all about work.
It's about living too.
A smarter city protects and promotes its cultural heritage so everyone can learn more about their history, their art, their place in the world.
in a smart education system, we should always be learning.
From grade school to college,
to workforce development, to personal enrichment.
In the smarter city,
every experience is a learning opportunity.